Fiancee and stepdaughter scam me out of $124,000 to fund ex-husband's lavish life. All right, so I'm Greg, 49, and I've been with my fiancée Amanda for 15 years. Never married, but we've been living together long enough that it feels like it. Now, Amanda's daughter Cassie, who's 25, is getting married to her boyfriend Max. And like an idiot, I agreed to pay for the wedding. I thought, hey, I've been in Cassie's life since she was 10. She's practically my kid, right? Wrong. I'm not rolling in cash, but I've done well for myself with my own business. I'm not trying to brag, just saying I've worked hard to get where I am. Anyway, Cassie's dream wedding is some big fancy deal, and somehow the budget ballooned to around 100,000 pounds. That's like $124,000 in US dollars. Yeah, crazy, I know. But I didn't want to be the bad guy and ruin her big day, so I just went along with it. I thought it would all be worth it, to see her happy. The first red flag was when the wedding invitations went out. I noticed my own mom and stepkids weren't on the list. Amanda's side? All there. Max's side? Covered. I asked Amanda about it, and she says, "Oh, it was probably just an oversight. Cassie must have forgotten." Seriously? My mom gets forgotten from her granddaughter's wedding? That didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I didn't want to make a scene, figured it'd get fixed. So I bring it up to Cassie a few days later, all casual like, "Hey, what's up with the invites? My mom and the kids didn't get one." She acts surprised and says it's a no-kids wedding, which, okay, fine. But then I find out Max's nieces and nephews are invited. So now I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell? I ask her why my stepkids aren't invited if it's a no-kids thing. She fumbles around, saying it's just a mistake, and she'll fix it. Now, here's where things start really getting weird. A couple of nights later, we're having this nice family dinner with Max's parents at my place, and Cassie starts talking about the wedding. Everything's going fine, and then out of nowhere, she drops this bomb. She's decided that her real dad, Tony, who's been a total deadbeat her whole life, is going to walk her down the aisle. I'm sitting there, completely blindsided. I mean, this guy has been out of the picture for decades. He's never paid child support, never showed up for her, and all of a sudden he's daddy of the year because he reached out to her 6 months ago? The same guy who ghosted her for years now gets the honor of walking her down the aisle? What about me? I've been the one who raised her, took care of her, and let's not forget I'm the one paying for this whole thing. So I look at her, totally shocked, and say, "Wait, I thought I was walking you down the aisle." Cassie doesn't even blink. She just says, "Yeah, I thought about it, but it's important to me that my real dad walks me. He's my biological father." Now I'm pissed, but I'm trying to keep my cool because we've got guests. So I calmly ask, "Well, if your biological dad is walking you down the aisle, is he also going to help with the wedding costs?" Cassie just shrugs and says, "No, of course not. You've always said you'd pay for it." At that point, I lost it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice getting louder. "I pay for your 80,000 pounds wedding, but some deadbeat who's done nothing for you gets to walk you down the aisle? How does that make any sense?" Cassie goes quiet, and Amanda, sitting next to me, looks like she's about to explode. I could tell she was embarrassed in front of Max's parents. But honestly, I didn't care at that point. It felt like I'd been slapped in the face. And it wasn't just the walk down the aisle, it was the whole situation. Here I am, shelling out 80,000 pounds, which is no small chunk of change, and I'm just supposed to be the guy writing checks while the deadbeat gets all the glory? Nah, that wasn't gonna fly with me. Max's parents, sitting across from me, look super uncomfortable, like they're not sure if they should say something or just stay quiet. Amanda finally speaks up, saying something like, "Greg, we've been planning this for over a year. You can't just back out now." Oh, but I could, and I did. I stood up from the table and said, "If your real dad is good enough to walk you down the aisle, he's good enough to pay for the wedding. I'm done. You can figure it out." The room went dead silent. Cassie looked like she was going to cry. Amanda was glaring at me like I'd just ruined everything. And Max's parents? They just sat there, looking like they wanted to disappear. I didn't care, though. I'd had enough. All right, so after the whole dinner fiasco where Cassie announced her deadbeat dad would be walking her down the aisle, things in my house turned into a total mess. I thought Amanda and Cassie would cool off after a day or two, maybe realize they were wrong, and we'd talk it out like adults. But nah, they doubled down hard. The next morning, Amanda storms into my office, absolutely livid. She's yelling about how I've embarrassed her and ruined all the wedding plans. It wasn't even about the wedding itself anymore. She was just pissed that I made her look bad in front of Max's family. Not once did she stop to think about how I felt after raising her daughter for 15 years, only to be treated like some side character in her life. She hits me with, "We've already paid deposits on everything. You can't just pull out now, Greg." I told her, I can and I will. If Cassie wants her biological father to be her main guy at the wedding, let him handle the costs. Amanda went off about how we couldn't get refunds, that pulling out now would mean losing everything. I wasn't buying it, though. So I grabbed my laptop and checked out the contracts I'd signed with the vendors. Most of them had cancellation fees, sure, but we were still within the window to get most of the money back. She didn't believe me, of course, so I showed her. And that's when she switched tactics. Now, it wasn't about me ruining the wedding, it was about how I was letting down family. She actually said, Cassie is your daughter. Don't you want to see her happy? That hit me like a brick. I thought about it for a second. And yeah, I did want to see her happy. I mean, I'd been there for all her major life moments, her high school graduation, when she got into college, her first job. But the thing that was gnawing at me was how she could just replace me like I was nothing. How could she just drop me after all those years? But then I remembered the night before, sitting at that dinner table, hearing her talk about her real dad like he was some kind of hero. That brought me right back to reality. So I stood firm and said, if Tony is the one walking her down the aisle, he can be the one to pay for it. Amanda wasn't hearing it. She kept saying that Tony didn't have the money, that he was broke, and that I was supposed to step up and be the bigger person. I shot back with, I'm not a piggy bank, Amanda. You want a wedding? You figure it out. Then came the real kicker. Amanda dropped the bombshell. Whoops, sorry for using that word. She tells me that I wasn't just paying for the wedding. Nope. Cassie and Max had also planned this lavish honeymoon in Mauritius, and guess who was footing the bill for that too? Yep, me. The tickets alone cost around £30,000, about $37,500. First class and everything. Now, you have to understand, I never agreed to pay for the honeymoon. I thought I was just handling the wedding expenses, which was already a ridiculous amount. So I asked her straight up, since when was I paying for their vacation? She tried to downplay it, saying Cassie and Max had just assumed I'd cover the whole thing, since I was already handling the wedding. Like, seriously? I was just supposed to assume that I'd be shelling out for a honeymoon too? I laughed, but not in a funny way. More like one of those, I can't believe this is actually happening kind of laughs. I told Amanda, there's no way I'm paying for them to go on a fancy vacation. That's not my problem. She flipped out, saying I was ruining everything for Cassie and that I was being selfish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm the selfish one? I was about to spend nearly £100,000 on a wedding, and now I'm supposed to add another £30,000 for a vacation? That's almost £130,000, about $160,000, down the drain, all because Cassie wanted to play pretend with her bio dad and live like royalty for a week. At this point, I was done. I grabbed my phone, started calling up the vendors, and began the cancellation process. The venue said I'd get a partial refund, but it was better than nothing. The caterer was able to refund most of the deposit, but it'd take a couple weeks. Honestly, I didn't care how long it took, as long as I wasn't throwing more money into this black hole. Now, here's where things get really crazy. Cassie found out what I was doing, probably because Amanda told her, and she stormed into the house, screaming at me. How could you do this? You promised. We've been planning this for a year. I stayed calm and told her, I didn't promise anything. If you want your real dad to walk you down the aisle, he can pay for it. You're not getting a free wedding and a free vacation out of me. She lost it. She started calling me every name in the book, saying I was ruining her life, and how she deserved this big wedding because it was her dream. And then, the part that really got me, she said, you're not my real dad anyway. Why should you care? That was it. I was done. I told her to get out of my house. Amanda tried to calm things down, but I wasn't having it. I told them both they had a week to pack up and leave. I wasn't going to be disrespected in my own home. The thing is, I wasn't even mad about the money anymore. It was the fact that after all these years, I was still being treated like an outsider. I had given Cassie everything, a roof over her head, food on the table, and yeah, even love. But apparently that wasn't enough. All that mattered was that I had money, and they wanted to use me for it. A few days later, I went through my bank statements and changed all my passwords. No more access for Amanda or Cassie. If they wanted to throw a wedding and go on vacation, they'd have to figure it out themselves. I wasn't about to be used anymore. Update 1. So after I canceled the wedding and told Amanda and Cassie they had a week to move out, things in the house got real awkward. I could feel the tension every time I walked into a room. Amanda wasn't talking to me unless it was to argue. And Cassie? She acted like I didn't even exist. It was like I was the villain in a movie, but all I did was stop them from using me like a human ATM. The thing is, I thought maybe they'd cool off, take some responsibility, and try to make things right. I don't know. Maybe I was being too optimistic, but nope. They just kept acting like I was the one in the wrong for pulling the plug on the whole thing. Amanda kept saying stuff like, "You're tearing this family apart, Greg. Is that what you want?" And every time I heard it, I just thought, family? Since when? A couple of days go by, and I hear Cassie on the phone with Max. She's freaking out because, surprise, they can't afford to pay for the wedding themselves. Apparently, Max's family wasn't as loaded as I thought. I mean, they had a nice house and all, but they weren't sitting on piles of cash. They were probably counting on me to pay for everything too. Cassie was crying, saying they had no idea what they were going to do now. I could hear her through the walls, and part of me felt a little bad. I don't hate the girl, you know? I raised her. But after the way she treated me, I wasn't going to cave. I stayed strong because, honestly, I knew if I gave in now, they'd just keep taking advantage. Now, here's where things get interesting. About a week later, after they were supposed to be moving out, Amanda comes into the kitchen while I'm making coffee. She looks serious, like she's been thinking about something for a while, and says, "Greg, we need to talk." I'm like, "Yeah? What about?" She sits down and starts going on about how things have gotten out of control, that maybe they were wrong for assuming I'd pay for everything, but that Cassie's wedding is still important, and we should find a way to make it work. I cut her off and said, "Amanda, I'm not paying for the wedding or the honeymoon. We've been through this." But then she dropped something I wasn't expecting. She tells me that Cassie's biological dad, Tony, the deadbeat who never paid a penny in child support, had recently come into some money. Apparently, he'd won a settlement from an old work injury lawsuit, something like £25,000, around $30,000. Not enough to cover the whole wedding, but a decent chunk. And guess what? He wasn't willing to put a single pound toward the wedding. Nothing. Not even after everything Cassie did to bring him back into her life. Amanda told me that Tony basically said, "I've got my own plans for that money." I almost laughed, but I held it in. So this guy, who Cassie is letting walk her down the aisle, gets a fat check and won't even help his own daughter with her wedding? Meanwhile, I'm supposed to cover the whole thing? Yeah, no thanks. I looked Amanda straight in the eyes and said, "And you still think I should pay for this wedding?" She sighed and said, "I know it's a lot to ask, but I didn't realize Tony wouldn't help at all. I thought he'd at least pitch in." At this point, I'm thinking, this whole thing is a disaster. But then Amanda says something that really took me by surprise. She goes, "Cassie doesn't want to move out." Now that was news to me. I thought they'd both be ready to pack up and leave after I cut off the wedding money, but apparently Cassie was in a panic because she had nowhere to go. Max's family didn't have room for her. And Tony? Yeah, forget about it. The guy wasn't even offering her a place to stay. So now they were trying to figure out how to stay in my house without me losing my mind. Amanda starts saying maybe we can come to some sort of compromise. "Maybe if we scale back the wedding," she says, "we could make it work with what little money we have." I wasn't buying it. I told her, "This isn't about money anymore. It's about respect. I'm not just a wallet, Amanda." She tried to argue again, saying that family is about sacrifice and supporting each other, but I'd heard enough. I cut her off and told her that Cassie and Max could figure out their own wedding, and they had until the end of the week to be out of the house. No exceptions. Amanda walked out, and I could tell she wasn't happy, but what else was there to say? I wasn't budging, but of course things weren't over yet. The next day, I get a text from Max. It was out of the blue, and he'd never reached out to me directly before. I figured he was going to apologize or something, but nope. Instead, he starts demanding that I reconsider paying for the wedding. He actually had the nerve to say, "This isn't just about Cassie, Greg. You're affecting my life too." I couldn't believe it. This guy who barely spoke to me when we met was now trying to guilt me into paying for his wedding? I didn't even respond. I just blocked his number. I wasn't about to let some 25-year-old kid tell me how to spend my money. Later that night, Amanda tells me that Max's parents had been pressuring him to reach out to me. Apparently, they were just as desperate to get this wedding paid for as everyone else. I couldn't believe how all these people saw me as nothing more than a checkbook. I told Amanda, "That's it. They need to leave by Friday or I'll start packing their stuff myself." She tried to push back, but I wasn't having it. I've already made my decision. I'm not changing my mind. By the time Friday came around, Cassie and Max had finally realized that they weren't getting a free wedding, and Tony? Well, I never heard from him again. Amanda and Cassie packed their things, and that was the last I saw of them. For the first time in weeks, my house felt quiet. Peaceful, even. And while it sucked that things had ended like this, I knew I made the right choice. I wasn't going to be used anymore. Update 2. So, after Amanda and Cassie moved out, I finally had my house back to myself. For the first time in what felt like forever, it was quiet. I'd like to say things went back to normal, but man, it didn't take long for the weirdness to kick in. A couple of days after they left, I started getting these random calls from unknown numbers. At first, I ignored them, but when they kept coming, I finally answered one. Guess who it was? Max's mom. Yeah, out of all people, she's the one trying to get in touch with me. Now, I barely know this woman. We've maybe exchanged a few words at family events, but we're not exactly close. She starts going on about how she's worried about Cassie and how this whole situation has been hard on everyone. I could tell right away she was fishing for something, probably trying to guilt me into changing my mind about the wedding. I cut her off and told her straight up, "Look, whatever's going on with Cassie and Max is none of my business anymore. They'll figure it out." But she wouldn't let it go. She kept talking, saying how they were struggling to find a place to live and dealing with financial stress. I wasn't buying it. I mean, come on. They were expecting me to drop around 100,000 pounds, close to $120,000, on a wedding, but now suddenly they're broke? I told Max's mom the same thing I'd been telling everyone else. It's not my responsibility. She finally got the hint and hung up, but I could tell from her tone that this wasn't over. Sure enough, a few days later, I get a text from Amanda. She hadn't talked to me since she moved out, so I was surprised to see her name pop up on my phone. I opened it up, and it was this long, rambling message about how they'd found a small apartment, but they were struggling to cover the rent. She didn't outright ask me for money, but it was clear that's what she was hinting at. I didn't even respond. I was done, but things just kept escalating from there. One afternoon, I'm sitting at home when there's a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was just a delivery. Nope. I open the door and there's Cassie standing there with Max, and they're both looking pretty rough, like they hadn't slept in days. I was caught off guard, but I wasn't about to invite them in. Cassie immediately starts with the guilt trip. "Dad, we didn't know what else to do. We're really struggling right now, and we thought maybe you could help us out just this once." She's got tears in her eyes, and I could tell she was trying to pull at my heartstrings. Max just stood there, looking awkward, not saying anything. But here's the thing. After everything that had happened, after the disrespect, the lies, and them treating me like a walking bank account, I wasn't about to give in. So I told her, "Cassie, I've done enough. You've got a real dad, remember? Maybe he can help you out." That set her off. She started yelling, saying how Tony had bailed on her again and wasn't answering her calls. She said he took his 25,000 pounds, about $30,000 settlement and disappeared. Big surprise, right? The deadbeat dad she chose over me turned out to be a deadbeat after all. Max finally spoke up, trying to be the reasonable one. He said, "Greg, we're just asking for a little help, maybe enough to cover our first few months of rent until we get back on our feet." I wasn't having it. I looked at them both and said, "I've already helped you. I gave you 15 years of my life, and I was willing to pay for your wedding until you decided your real dad was more important than me. Now, you're on your own." Cassie started crying harder, but I could tell it wasn't because she felt bad for what she'd done. It was because her plan hadn't worked. Max was just standing there, looking defeated, and I almost felt bad for the guy. Almost. I told them both to leave, and as they walked away, Cassie turned around and said something that honestly floored me. She goes, "You're going to regret this. When I have kids, they'll never know you. You'll be the grandpa they never meet." I was stunned for a second. I mean, after everything, this was her final shot? Trying to hurt me by threatening to cut me off from future grandkids? It was such a low blow, but it didn't hit me the way she wanted it to. If she thought I was going to cave because of that, she was dead wrong. I just shook my head and said, "Good luck with that." Then I closed the door. But here's where it gets even weirder. A week later, I get an email from Amanda. Not a text this time, an actual email. She starts out by saying she's sorry for how things have turned out and that she wishes we could have worked things out differently. And then she drops the real reason she's emailing. Apparently, Max had called off the wedding. She didn't go into details, but from what I could piece together, Max finally had enough of Cassie's drama. He couldn't handle the stress, the money problems, and the fact that Cassie had burned so many bridges. He decided it wasn't worth it anymore. Amanda was asking if I could talk to Max, see if there was any way to convince him to reconsider. Like I had any influence over the guy. I hadn't even known him that long, and after everything that went down, I wasn't about to start playing matchmaker. I didn't reply to the email. What could I even say? It wasn't my problem anymore. But you know what the real kicker, sorry, there's that word again, was? A few days later, I heard from one of Amanda's friends that Tony, Cassie's bio dad, was spotted at a casino in Brighton, blowing through his settlement money like it was nothing. So while Cassie and Max were out here scrambling to pay rent, Tony was living it up, probably gambling away what little cash he had left. Honestly, the whole thing was just sad at this point, but at least I was out of it. Update 3. So after Cassie and Max showed up at my door begging for help, and after Amanda's ridiculous email asking me to fix their relationship, I thought I'd seen the last of the drama. Honestly, I was ready to move on. But of course, life had one more twist to throw at me. About a week after I got that email, I got an unexpected visitor, Amanda's brother Tim. Now, I've never been close with Tim. We've met at family gatherings, exchanged the usual pleasantries, but that's about it. So when he showed up at my house, I was immediately suspicious. What could he possibly want? Tim walks in, looking all uncomfortable, and I could tell right away he didn't want to be there. He sits down and starts with some small talk, asking me how I've been and all that. I wasn't in the mood for chit-chat, so I just asked him, "What's this really about, Tim?" He sighs and gets to the point. Cassie's in trouble. Max really left her this time, and Amanda's worried she's going to do something stupid. She's not handling things well. He looked at me like he expected me to jump up and fix everything, like somehow I was the key to making it all better. I just stared at him for a minute, trying to figure out if he was serious. "Tim, what do you expect me to do? They burned every bridge with me. I'm not swooping in to save them now." Tim shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, man, I know it's not fair, but they're really struggling. Cassie's talking about moving in with some friends, but they're not exactly the best crowd. Amanda's freaking out, and she doesn't know what to do." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They really thought I was still their safety net, even after everything. I told Tim, "I'm not responsible for Cassie's choices anymore. She made her bed, and now she's got a lie in it." Tim looked defeated, but he wasn't giving up just yet. "But what about Amanda? You guys have been together for 15 years. Don't you care about what happens to her?" And that's when it hit me. This wasn't really about Cassie at all. It was about Amanda. She'd been trying to find a way back into my life ever since I told her to move out. The email, the phone calls, the whole guilt trip about Cassie. It was all a setup to get me to take Amanda back. I stood up and looked at Tim, trying to stay calm. "I care about what happens to Amanda, but I'm not her solution anymore. She chose Cassie and Tony over me, and now she has to live with that decision. I'm done being the one they turn to whenever things go wrong." Tim didn't have much to say after that. He left, and I thought that would be the end of it. But I should have known better. A few days later, I get a letter in the mail from Amanda. Yeah, an actual handwritten letter. Who does that anymore? I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the best of me. In the letter, Amanda basically poured her heart out. She apologized for how things went down, said she regretted how she treated me, and begged me to reconsider. She even said she'd been thinking about getting back together, starting fresh, and fixing things between us. She also mentioned that Cassie had found a new place to live, some apartment downtown, and that she was working part-time at a coffee shop to make ends meet. Apparently Tony had vanished again, this time for good, and Cassie was back to square one. Amanda said she was terrified for Cassie and didn't know what to do without me there to help. The whole thing felt like a last-ditch effort to pull me back in. But by this point, I was over it. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the guilt trips, tired of being used, tired of always being the one to fix everyone else's problems. I'd given them 15 years of my life, and what did I get in return? Disrespect and betrayal. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it in the trash. After that, things finally started to settle down. I didn't hear from Amanda, Cassie, or Max again. For the first time in what felt like years, I had peace. No more drama, no more begging for money, no more guilt trips about being family. It was just me, in my house, living my life on my own terms. One day I got a call from my oldest son, Ben. He's 28 and has a family of his own. We don't talk as often as I'd like, but we're still close. Anyway, Ben called to tell me that his wife had just had their second child, and he wanted me to come visit. He even said they'd named the baby after me, Gregory Jr. That call meant the world to me. After everything with Amanda and Cassie, it was nice to know that someone still appreciated me. I booked a flight out to see Ben and his family, and let me tell you, holding my grandson for the first time was the best feeling in the world. It made all the crap I'd been through worth it, knowing that I had real family who cared about me. Before I left for the trip, I got one final piece of news. Remember Tony? Well, turns out, he wasn't just gambling away his settlement money. He'd also racked up a huge debt with some shady people. Word on the street was that he skipped town to avoid paying up, and nobody knew where he'd gone. Typical Tony, right? I didn't feel sorry for him. In fact, I felt a weird sense of satisfaction. Cassie had thrown me away for a guy like that, and now she was paying the price. I wasn't happy about it, but I couldn't deny that it was a little bit of karma coming back around. As for me, I was finally free. Free from the drama, the manipulation, the constant feeling that I was never enough. I was focused on my real family now, the ones who actually valued me for more than just my money. And you know what? It felt good. Really good. Really. Update 4. You asked when I thought things had finally calmed down. Something I never expected happened. You'd think after months of drama, people would just move on and leave me alone. But apparently that's not how life works. One afternoon, I get this message from someone I didn't recognize. It was from a lawyer's office asking me to call them back. I'm sitting there thinking, great, what now? I've been done with Amanda, Cassie, and the whole mess for a while now, so I couldn't figure out what this was about. I call the number, and the lawyer introduces himself and says he represents Tony. Yeah, that Tony, the deadbeat dad who vanished after blowing through his settlement money. My first reaction? Total confusion. What could Tony possibly have to do with me now? He was out of the picture, right? Well, turns out Tony had passed away. He got into some serious debt with the wrong people after losing his money gambling, and long story short, his disappearance wasn't by choice. The lawyer didn't give too many details, but it was clear Tony got in over his head, and things didn't end well for him. At first, I didn't really know how to feel about it. I mean, Tony was never a real father to Cassie, and as much as he caused problems in my life, I never wanted anything bad to happen to the guy. But here's the kicker. Sorry, I know I said I wouldn't use that word, but this really got me. Tony left everything he had to Cassie. Now, when I say everything, don't get excited. It wasn't some big inheritance or anything. The guy was broke by the time he passed. But there was one thing Tony left behind. A small house just outside of Birmingham. Apparently, it had been in his family for years, and somehow it never got sold during his many attempts to get out of debt. So, why was the lawyer calling me? Well, Tony had listed me as a backup contact because Cassie wasn't answering any of their calls. No surprise there. She'd probably moved on with her life after Max dumped her, and dealing with Tony's mess was the last thing on her mind. The lawyer asked me if I knew how to get in touch with her so they could settle everything. I sat there for a minute, thinking about whether I should get involved. I hadn't spoken to Cassie since she stormed out of my house, threatening that I'd never see her kids. Kids she didn't even have yet. But for some reason, I felt like I should let her know what was going on. So, against my better judgment, I gave the lawyer her most recent phone number and left it at that. A few days later, I get a call from Cassie. It's the first time I've heard her voice in months. And honestly, I wasn't sure how the conversation was going to go. She sounded different. Quieter, more serious. She told me she'd gotten the message from the lawyer and didn't know what to do. She didn't want anything to do with Tony's estate, didn't want the house, didn't want the responsibility. And then, something unexpected happened. She apologized for everything. I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me was still holding on to the anger from how she treated me. But hearing her apologize, hearing the regret in her voice, it caught me off guard. She admitted that she'd been selfish, that she'd let Tony back into her life without thinking about how it would affect me, and that she regretted choosing him over me. She didn't ask for money, didn't ask for anything, really. She just wanted to apologize and say that she wished things had been different. I stayed quiet for a while, thinking about how much had changed in the past year. I'd finally gotten my peace, and I wasn't about to let myself get sucked back into the chaos. But at the same time, I felt like this was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. So I told her, Cassie, I appreciate the apology, but what's done is done. You made your choices, and I made mine. I hope things work out for you, but I'm moving on with my life. She didn't argue or try to guilt trip me like she had in the past. She just said, I understand. That was the last time we spoke. As for the house Tony left behind, she ended up selling it, using the money to get a fresh start somewhere else. I don't know where she is now, and to be honest, I don't really care. I've got my own life to live, and I'm finally free from the weight of all that drama. And you know what? It feels good to close that chapter for real this time. Golden Boy Bro wrecked my startup, so I ditched my toxic family for good. Alright, so let me start by saying this. I've hated my younger brother Matt for as long as I can remember. I'm 33 now and he's 30, but it doesn't matter how old we get, he's always been a thorn in my side. And I'm not just saying that in a casual, oh, siblings fight sometimes kind of way. I mean, I really hate the guy. Always have. And honestly, I think I've got some pretty solid reasons for feeling that way. So a little background first. Growing up, our parents treated Matt like he was the second coming of royalty. They made it painfully clear that he was their favorite, their golden boy. They never even tried to hide it. Me? I was just the extra, the guy they tolerated but never really cared about. It's like no matter what I did, I was never good enough. Meanwhile, Matt could do the bare minimum, sometimes not even that, and get praised like he just cured cancer or something. I get it, some parents have favorites, but this wasn't just favoritism. This was full-blown worship. And to make it worse, we come from a pretty old-school, traditional family. Our parents are immigrants, and in their culture, the son is basically treated like a king. Doesn't matter if he's a screw-up. If he's a guy, he's automatically more important. Growing up, that was drilled into me every single day. Matt could have burned down the house, and my parents would have been like, oh, he's just expressing himself. I, on the other hand, couldn't do anything right. Ever. It wasn't always like this, though. When we were younger, I tried to make things work with him, tried to be the good older brother. But as we got older, Matt became more and more of a jerk. He knew he was the favorite, and man, did he lean into it hard. The guy thrived off being the center of attention. He'd constantly overshadow me, no matter what I achieved. And I achieved a lot. I was always the one working hard in school, getting good grades, getting my degree, while Matt coasted by, partying and barely passing classes. But guess who got all the praise? Yep, not me. One example that's burned into my brain is my 18th birthday. It was supposed to be a big deal, right? I had a bunch of friends over, my family was there. It was meant to be a fun time. But then, right in the middle of the party, Matt decides that this is the perfect moment to announce that he's dating some college senior and plans on dropping out of high school to go live with her. I don't know if you've ever witnessed a full-blown family meltdown, but that's exactly what happened. My parents freaked out, our relatives freaked out, and suddenly my birthday didn't matter. At all. Everything became about Matt's big decision. And to top it all off, the whole thing turned out to be a lie. He was just doing it for attention, just to ruin my moment. I should have seen it coming, honestly. That's just who Matt is. Everything has to be about him, all the time. And the worst part is, my parents fed into it. They didn't even try to punish him for ruining my birthday. Nope, they just coddled him like usual. It was always like that. But anyway, fast forward a few years, I'm out of the house, got into business school, graduated with honors, and started working in a decent-paying job. Meanwhile, Matt, he barely graduated high school, partied his way through his 20s, and was still mooching off our parents. He did a couple of odd jobs here and there, but nothing serious. But despite all that, my parents acted like he was some sort of business prodigy. They even went as far as throwing him a huge going-away party when he pretended to move out for college. When I left for school, my parents threw a small dinner with like 5 people. But for Matt, they rented out a freaking restaurant and invited everyone they knew. Typical, right? Anyway, I didn't let it bother me too much back then. I figured once I was out on my own, I wouldn't have to deal with the constant comparisons and the blatant favoritism anymore. And for a while, I didn't. I worked hard, saved up money, and finally came up with an idea for my own business. I spent months working on the plan with my business partner, Eric. We put together a killer proposal, and I thought, okay, maybe this is my shot. Maybe I can actually make something of myself without relying on anyone else. But here's where things go off the rails. After months of work, I figured I'd pitch the idea to my parents. My dad was always decent in business, and I thought, hey, maybe they'll want to invest. Maybe they'll actually support me this time. I mean, I didn't have high hopes, but it was worth a shot, right? And to my surprise, they were into it. They said they'd invest, help me get things going. I was over the moon. It felt like, for the first time in my life, they were actually backing me. But then Matt happened. I don't know what kind of twisted satisfaction he gets from screwing me over, but the guy convinced my parents that investing in my business was a bad idea. He told them that it was too risky, that I didn't have what it takes to succeed, and that they should pull out before they lost any money. The worst part? They listened to him. Just like that, all the promises they made, the money they said they'd invest, it was all gone. And this wasn't just casual talk. This was after I'd quit my job, after Eric and I had put everything on the line. I remember sitting in their living room trying to process what they were telling me. My dad just looked at me and said, "We've reconsidered. Matt thinks this isn't a good idea." That's it. No discussion, no warning, just blindsided me with it. I was furious. I mean, here I was, ready to start something that could have been huge, and they pulled the rug out from under me because my idiot brother had a bad feeling about it. I don't think I've ever been that angry in my life. I told them exactly what I thought of them, of Matt, of everything. I stormed out of the house and didn't look back. From that moment on, I was done with them. I couldn't believe that after everything I'd worked for, they'd still side with Matt. It wasn't just about the money. It was about them never believing in me, never seeing me as more than second best. And so, that was it. I cut them off completely. I didn't need their support. And I sure as hell didn't need Matt sabotaging everything I worked for. I was done. And looking back, it was probably the best decision I ever made. So after that whole disaster with Matt and my parents pulling out of my business deal, I was wrecked. Like, seriously. I had no idea what to do next. I had already quit my job and there was no going back to that. My business partner Eric was freaking out too. But he's the type of guy who tries to keep it together, you know? He just kept saying stuff like, "We'll figure it out, man." Even though I could tell he wasn't really sure how we were going to do that. Honestly, at that moment, I just felt completely screwed. I spent the next few days just sitting at home, going through everything in my head, trying to piece together how I got myself into this mess. It wasn't like I hadn't put in the work. I mean, I spent months building this business plan from the ground up, and it was solid. I had proof of concept, a detailed financial model, even a couple of smaller investors who were ready to chip in. But my parents were supposed to be the big piece, the ones who'd give us the boost we needed to get off the ground. And now? Now it was gone. All because Matt said I was going to fail. I kept replaying that conversation in my head, like, how could they just drop everything without even telling me why until I forced it out of them? I guess that's just how deep their blind trust in Matt goes. They believed him over me again. That realization stung the most, like I was never going to be seen as capable or even equal to him in their eyes. But I couldn't stay in that mindset forever. Eric and I had to regroup, fast. We started talking about next steps. The first thing we needed to figure out was whether we could salvage any of the investors we had lined up, the smaller ones who were willing to take a risk on us, but weren't going to be able to give us nearly as much as my parents would have. So we sat down and started making calls. And let me tell you, cold calling potential investors when you've just had your biggest financial backing fall through, it's not fun. It was basically a marathon of, sorry, we can't help, and maybe next time. The first few calls were brutal, and I could feel my hope draining with each rejection. But then, one day we got a call back from this small firm we'd pitched to a while back. They weren't offering anything huge, but it was something. It was enough to keep us from completely sinking, and at that point, that's all I needed. Eric and I jumped at the opportunity. We reworked our entire budget, cut costs, and decided we'd go lean until we could prove the business could stand on its own. It wasn't what we planned, but it was better than nothing. So we kept grinding, putting in long hours, trying to make sure every penny was accounted for. Here's the thing, though. Those first few months? Absolute hell. There were moments when I thought we were done for, like the entire business was going to crash and burn before we even got started. I couldn't sleep. I'd stay up all night worrying about whether we'd made the right choice, if we should have just thrown in the towel and gone back to our old jobs. But the thought of giving up made me sick. I'd already lost my family's support. I wasn't going to lose this too. This was all I had left. So Eric and I pushed through, running on fumes, trying to make it work. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot. We had to cut back on so many things we thought we needed. At one point, we were literally working out of a friend's basement because we couldn't afford office space anymore. But I wasn't complaining. We were still moving forward, even if it was slower than we expected. A few months in, something crazy happened. We got our first big client. I'm talking huge. We had been networking like crazy, trying to make connections with anyone who would hear us out. And somehow, it paid off. This client saw potential in what we were doing and decided to take a chance on us. It wasn't just a lifeline. It was the break we needed. The money started coming in, slowly at first, but it was enough to get us out of survival mode. We started building momentum, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I actually felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to make it. But of course, things couldn't stay smooth for long. Right when we were starting to hit our stride, guess who comes crawling back into the picture? Yep, Matt. One day, out of nowhere, I get a text from him. It was weird because we hadn't spoken since I blew up at our parents. The text just said, "Hey, can we talk?" Like, really? Talk? After everything that happened? I almost didn't respond, but curiosity got the better of me. So I texted back, "About what?" He calls me, and I pick up, half expecting some apology or explanation. But nope. Turns out Matt had his own little disaster brewing. He didn't say much at first, just danced around the topic. But eventually he let it slip that he was in deep trouble with his own finances. Apparently he had made some bad investments, big shocker there, and was up to his neck in debt. And now he wanted my help. I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. After he'd sabotaged my business, after he convinced my parents to screw me over, now he wanted me to bail him out? I was floored. I mean, what did he expect me to say? "Sure, bro. Let me help you out after you ruined my life." Yeah, no. I flat out told him that wasn't happening. I wasn't his safety net. And if he was in trouble, that was on him. He tried to argue, saying that we were brothers. and that we should help each other out. I just laughed and hung up. There was no way in hell I was falling for that. After that call, I felt this weird sense of relief, like, finally, I was done with all of them. I wasn't tied to my family anymore, wasn't caught up in their drama. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I'd survived without them, and now I didn't need them for anything. Eric and I kept growing the business. We hired a few employees, moved into a proper office, and started expanding. It was hard, but it was also the most rewarding thing I'd ever done. And every time I looked at how far we'd come, I knew it was because I didn't let Matt or my parents drag me down. I was free finally, and it felt damn good. Update 1. Alright, so let me tell you about the time my parents and Matt came crawling back into my life. By this point, I hadn't spoken to any of them in almost 3 years. After the whole business sabotage thing, I cut them off completely, and honestly, it felt great. I didn't need their negativity, and I was doing just fine on my own. My business was starting to take off. Eric and I were getting new clients, and I was finally starting to feel like all the hard work was paying off. Life was pretty good. Then, one Sunday afternoon, I'm just chilling at home, thinking it's going to be a quiet day. But suddenly, there's a knock at the door. Now, I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was kind of confused. I opened the door, and guess who's standing there? My parents. I kid you not, it was like seeing ghosts. I hadn't heard from them since that last argument where I told them to basically get lost, and now, here they were, standing on my doorstep like nothing had happened. At first, I didn't know what to say. I just stood there staring at them, waiting for one of them to say something. My dad finally broke the silence, giving me this awkward smile and saying, "Can we come in?" Honestly, I didn't even want to let them in, but curiosity got the better of me. So I stepped aside and let them into my apartment. We sat down in the living room, and I was still waiting for some kind of explanation, maybe even an apology. But no. Instead, they start making small talk, asking me how I've been, how the business is going, all that fake "we care about you" stuff. I wasn't buying it. I knew they had to have some kind of agenda because there's no way they just showed up out of the blue after all this time to see how I was doing. After what felt like forever, my dad finally got to the point. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We've been hearing about your success, your business. It's doing well, isn't it?" The moment those words left his mouth, I knew exactly where this was going. I just nodded, staying silent, because I wanted to see how far they'd take this. My mom jumped in next, saying, "We've been thinking, now that things are going so well for you, maybe it's time for us to be involved. We could invest, help you grow even bigger." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were the same people who had pulled out at the last minute and nearly tanked my entire business. And now that they saw I was making it work, they wanted back in? I didn't know whether to laugh or scream, but I kept my cool. I looked at them and said, "You want to invest in my business? Now? After you bailed on me when I needed you the most?" My dad tried to explain it away, saying something like, "Well, we weren't sure back then, but now we can see you've proven yourself." As if that was supposed to make everything okay. I wasn't having any of it. I told them flat out that I didn't need their money and that I wasn't interested in their support. I reminded them how they left me high and dry when I was desperate for help, and now that I was succeeding without them, they wanted to ride the wave. The more I talked, the more uncomfortable they got. My mom started tearing up, saying, "But we're your parents. We just want to be a part of your success." I wasn't falling for that guilt trip. I could see right through it. They didn't care about me or my success. They cared about being associated with it. They wanted the bragging rights, the chance to tell everyone that they had a hand in building something great, even though they had nothing to do with it. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I told them they could leave and that I had nothing more to say. My dad, looking frustrated, tried one last time to convince me. He said, "You don't understand. We're family. You're supposed to let us help." That's when I lost it. I snapped and said, "You weren't family when you bailed on me, so don't pull the family card now." I told them that they had made their choice years ago, and now they had to live with it. They weren't getting a second chance to screw me over. At that point, my mom was full-on crying, saying things like, "I always knew this would happen. You've changed. College changed you. You're too independent now." She said they never should have let me go to school, that if I had stayed home, I would have known my place and wouldn't be acting so ungrateful. I just stood there, speechless for a second. It was like everything she said confirmed what I'd always known. My success wasn't what they cared about. What they really wanted was control. If I had failed, I would have been dependent on them. And that's what they wanted. They couldn't stand the idea that I had done it without them. I told them to leave one last time, and this time, my dad finally got the message. He stood up, pulling my mom up with him, and they left without another word. As soon as the door shut behind them, I felt this weird mix of relief and anger. I was glad they were gone, but part of me couldn't believe how blind they were to what they'd done. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? But no, Matt had to get involved. A couple of hours later, I get a call from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even picked up. It was Matt. He started going off immediately, accusing me of disrespecting our parents and saying that I owed them an apology. He was talking like I had committed some crime, telling me that I needed to make things right with them because they raised me, and that I wouldn't be where I am without them. I couldn't help but laugh. I told him straight up that I didn't owe them anything, least of all an apology. I reminded him of how he sabotaged me, how he convinced them to pull their investment, and how I had made it without any help from them. He didn't have much to say after that, just a bunch of weak excuses about how he never meant to hurt me and that family should stick together. I hung up. I didn't need to hear any more of his BS. I was done with all of them. They made their choices, and I made mine. After that day, I blocked all their numbers. I didn't want to give them another chance to weasel their way back into my life. And honestly, I've never looked back. I built something on my own, without them, and I wasn't about to let them take any credit for it now. That's the thing with family. They think they can mess with you, but when you finally stand up for yourself, they act like you're the problem. Well, not anymore. I'm done with them, and I'm better off for it. Update 2. Alright, so after that last stunt with my parents showing up at my place, I thought things would calm down. I mean, I figured after I told them to get lost, they'd finally take the hint and just leave me alone. But man, I was wrong. Turns out the story wasn't quite over yet, and it was Matt who came crashing down this time. So a few weeks go by and everything's pretty quiet. Business is going well, Eric and I are busy with new clients, and honestly, life's good. I hadn't heard a word from my parents or Matt since I blocked them, and it was honestly like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. No drama, no guilt trips, nothing. Just peace. But of course, peace doesn't last long when you've got a brother like Matt. One day, out of the blue, yeah, I said it, sorry, I get a call from a mutual friend, Jake. Now, Jake's not really in my close circle or anything, but he's one of those guys who keeps in touch with everyone. He's the type who knows what's going on in people's lives, whether you want him to or not. Anyway, he calls me up and says, "Hey man, did you hear what's going on with Matt?" Now, my first thought was, why the hell would I care? But Jake's the kind of guy who can't keep anything to himself. So he starts spilling the details without me even asking. Turns out Matt's life was going down the drain. And when I say down the drain, I mean fast. Apparently his whole business that he'd been bragging about to my parents for years, yeah, that was a complete lie. He wasn't running anything. He'd been living off loans and handouts from my parents and, get this, racking up a massive amount of debt. I knew Matt wasn't exactly the most responsible guy, but even I didn't expect things to be this bad. According to Jake, he had made some really bad investment choices. Surprise, surprise, and had lost most of the money he got from my parents. He had also borrowed a ton of cash from shady places, and now the whole thing was catching up with him. Debt collectors were knocking on his door, and he had no way to pay them back. I couldn't help but laugh when Jake told me all this. I mean, this was the same guy who had convinced my parents to pull out of my business because he thought I'd fail. And now look who's drowning in debt. Karma's a funny thing, huh? But here's the kicker. My parents had no idea how bad things were for Matt. He'd been hiding the whole mess from them, still pretending everything was fine. They were under the impression that he was some big-shot entrepreneur when, in reality, he was barely hanging on. I guess that's why he was so desperate to get involved in my business. He saw it as his way out, his way to cover up the disaster he'd created for himself. Anyway, after Jake fills me in, I just go on with my day. It wasn't my problem, and I wasn't about to get involved. Matt dug his own grave, and I wasn't going to be the one to pull him out of it. But of course, things didn't stay quiet for long. A couple of days later, I get a frantic call from my mom. She's crying, which wasn't exactly a shocker at this point, but she's going on and on about how Matt's in trouble, how he's in over his head with money issues, and how they're losing everything because of him. I didn't say anything at first, just listened as she went on about how they had bailed Matt out of debt multiple times, and now they were struggling to keep up. My dad had even started dipping into their retirement savings to cover for Matt. They were about to lose their house because they'd taken out loans against it to keep Matt afloat. It was a complete financial nightmare. Then she hit me with it. She asked if I could help. Yep. After everything, after all the crap they put me through, my mom actually asked if I could help Matt. She didn't even try to sugarcoat it or make it about family. No, she straight up said, "We need money to help Matt out of this situation." I just sat there for a minute, trying to wrap my head around the fact that she was even asking me this. I told her, flat out, that I wasn't giving them a single dime. I wasn't about to bail Matt out of his mess, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let them guilt trip me into it. I said, "You chose him over me every single time. Now you can deal with it." My mom didn't take that well. She started crying harder, going on about how they were going to lose everything and how Matt didn't mean for things to get this bad. But I wasn't budging. I told her they made their choice when they backed Matt and screwed me over. Now they had to live with the consequences. After that call, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understand where I was coming from. But nope. The next day, I got a text from my dad asking if I'd reconsider. He tried to hit me with the whole family helps family line, saying that Matt needed me and that they were all in this together. But I knew better. This wasn't about family. This was about them refusing to admit they'd been wrong about Matt. They were trying to clean up his mess just like they always had. And now that they were sinking, they wanted me to jump in and save them. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't need to. They could keep digging that hole if they wanted to, but I wasn't about to jump in after them. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that Matt had to sell his car to pay off some of his debts. It wasn't enough to cover everything, though, and now he was getting desperate. My parents were still trying to keep up appearances, pretending everything was fine to the rest of the family. But I knew it was just a matter of time before the whole thing collapsed. And honestly, I didn't feel bad for him. Not one bit. Matt had spent his whole life coasting by, relying on everyone else to clean up his messes. He had sabotaged me, lied to our parents, and now he was paying the price. The last I heard, Matt was considering moving back in with my parents because he couldn't afford rent anymore. They were scrambling to keep their house, barely making ends meet because they were still bailing him out at every turn. It was honestly pathetic. But here's the thing. I'm not going to be the one who saves them. I've built my own life, my own success, and I've done it without their help. If they want to keep sinking money into Matt's bottomless pit, that's their choice. But they're not taking me down with them. And that, my friends, is what happens when you put all your faith in the wrong person. Update 3. So, after everything that went down with Matt and my parents, you'd think that would be the end of it, right? Like, surely they'd finally realize I wasn't going to swoop in and save them from their mess. But of course, that's not how things work in my family. I swear, every time I thought I'd cut ties for good, something would pull me right back into the chaos. A couple of months after I told my parents I wasn't helping them with Matt's financial disaster, I got a call from my Aunt Linda. Now, Aunt Linda's always been the one person in my family who I actually liked. She was more down to earth and never really bought into the whole Matt is a genius narrative my parents pushed. So when she called, I figured it might be something important. The first thing she said when I picked up was, "You might want to sit down for this." And that's never a good way to start a conversation, right? I wasn't sitting though, and I told her to just spit it out. That's when she hit me with it. "Your parents are selling their house." At first, I wasn't sure if I heard her right. Selling the house? The same house they had sworn they'd never leave? The one they'd spent years telling everyone would stay in the family forever? I asked her why, but deep down, I already knew. Turns out, things had gotten worse for Matt. Like, way worse. He hadn't just racked up debt with some sketchy lenders. He was now being sued by one of the businesses he tried to partner with. And my parents had no choice but to sell the house to cover the legal fees and whatever was left of his debts. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there listening to Aunt Linda lay out the whole mess. My parents were in total denial, apparently still convinced that Matt was just going through a rough patch and that things would turn around for him. They were selling their house, their retirement savings were gone, and they still thought Matt would somehow get back on track. It was crazy. My parents had always been pretty stubborn, but this was next-level delusion. I mean, they were literally throwing away everything they had to save a guy who didn't care. And the worst part? Matt wasn't even living with them anymore. He'd skipped town, probably to avoid all the people he owed money to. I asked Aunt Linda why she was telling me all this. Like, what did she expect me to do about it? And that's when she dropped another bombshell. My parents had been telling the rest of the family that I was the one refusing to help them, that I was the selfish son who wouldn't lift a finger to save the family home. I felt my blood boil. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, minding my own business, staying out of their mess, and now they were dragging my name through the mud to cover for Matt's screw-ups. Aunt Linda said she didn't believe them, but apparently a lot of the family did. I guess it was easier for my parents to paint me as the villain than to admit they'd screwed up by putting all their faith in Matt. After that call, I had to sit down and think about what to do next. I mean, part of me just wanted to walk away and never deal with them again. But another part of me was pissed that they were smearing my name to cover up their own mistakes. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called my parents. I hadn't spoken to them since they asked for money months ago, but I needed to hear their side of the story. When my mom picked up, she sounded like she'd been crying. She didn't even say hello. The first thing out of her mouth was, "Are you calling to help?" I couldn't believe it. Even after everything, she still thought I might swoop in and save the day. I asked her straight up, "Are you telling the family that I refuse to help you save the house?" She hesitated. That told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't about to let her weasel her way out of this, so I pressed her harder. I told her I knew about the lies they'd been spreading, and that I wasn't going to sit back while they made me look like the bad guy. Finally, she broke down and admitted it. She said they didn't know what else to do. They were desperate, and they thought if they made me look bad enough, maybe I'd feel guilty and step in. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her there was no chance in hell I'd ever help them now. Not after all the lies and manipulation. Then my dad got on the phone and things got heated fast. He started yelling, saying that I had abandoned the family and that Matt was still my brother, no matter what. He said I owed it to them to help fix things because family sticks together. That was the last straw for me. I told him he made his choice years ago when he sided with Matt. I reminded him how they threw me under the bus to protect their golden child and how they've been enabling Matt's failures for years. I told him they were only reaping what they'd sown and that it wasn't my job to clean up their mess. My dad tried to argue, but I wasn't listening anymore. I told him this was the last time we'd ever speak, and that if they needed help, they could go ask Matt. After all, he was their favorite, right? I hung up before he could say anything else. I blocked both their numbers after that. I was done, for real this time. A couple of weeks later, Aunt Linda called me again. She said my parents sold the house and were moving into a small apartment. They had barely enough to cover their bills now, and Matt? He hadn't even bothered to show up. Last anyone heard, he was living with some friend in another city, still avoiding his problems. I guess that's what happens when you put all your faith in the wrong person. My parents lost everything trying to save Matt, and now they had nothing left. Meanwhile, I was building a life for myself, one they had no part in. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. In the end, they made their choice, and so did I. And I'm finally at peace with that.